In the year 48 before Christ, a Roman general ordered the Egyptian fleet burned in the harbor of Alexandria. The fire spread, and somewhere in the smoke, the greatest collection of human knowledge the world had ever assembled began to disappear. But here is what makes this a mystery, not a tragedy. 25 years after that fire, a geographer named Strabo visited Alexandria. He walked into the library. He read its scrolls. He wrote an entire book using its sources, and he never mentioned that it had burned down. The Library of Alexandria is the most famous destruction in history, and we cannot say with certainty when it died, who was responsible, or even what was inside it, because the catalogue that would have told us is also lost. For 700 years, this library survived war, fire, religious conflict, and political neglect. It may have died slowly, and the forces that ended it include names you know, and some you don't expect. This is Vanished Threads, and tonight, the fire that didn't just burn books, it burned the memory of what humanity once knew. In 283 BCE, Ptolemy I, successor to Alexander the Great, founded something unprecedented. Not just a library, a muson, a temple to the Muses, a place where over 100 scholars lived, ate, slept, and dedicated their entire lives to one purpose: knowing everything. At its peak, the library held between 40,000 and 700,000 scrolls. The numbers vary by a factor of 17, because nobody counted. Or if they did, the count didn't survive. What we do know, it housed works from Greece, Egypt, Persia, India, and Assyria. It had the first library catalogue ever created, the Pinakes, written by a man named Callimachus. That catalogue is also gone. Inside those walls, a man named Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched for over 1,000 years. He did it using scrolls that no longer exist. Today, the library's location is unknown. Archaeologists have never found it. Modern Alexandria was built on top of ancient Alexandria. The harbor has risen, the palaces have sunk. The scrolls, all papyrus, turned to dust centuries ago. And yet this story matters now more than ever, because in an age of digital memory, we are learning the same lesson the ancients did. Knowledge that isn't actively preserved is actively forgotten. Imagine living in a place where your only job was to read, to translate, to copy, and to understand. The scholars of the Muson didn't have families in the modern sense. They had the library. They lived in its halls. They ate at its tables. They were paid by the king to do what most people do as a hobby: learn. Callimachus, the first librarian, created a system to organize all of it. The Pinakes, 120 scrolls listing every work by author, genre, and subject. It was the Google of the ancient world, and like Google, it indexed things that would otherwise be impossible to find. Unlike Google, every single copy of it burned. Eratosthenes was the chief librarian, a mathematician, a geographer, a poet. He measured the earth using a stick, a well, and the shadow of a tower, and got within 2% of the true value. He didn't invent the method. He found it in a scroll from the library's collection, a scroll written by someone whose name we don't know, because the scroll didn't survive. The Ptolemies didn't just collect books, they hunted them. Every ship that docked in Alexandria was searched. If a book was found, it was confiscated, copied, and the copy was given to the owner. The original stayed in the library. They borrowed books from other kingdoms under false pretenses, kept the originals, and sent back copies. 7 centuries later, a woman named Hypatia taught philosophy and mathematics in Alexandria's streets. She was the daughter of Theon, a scholar connected to the library's intellectual tradition. She didn't just teach, she improved. She edited existing works. She wrote commentaries. She was, by every account, the finest mind of her generation. Hypatia taught Christians, pagans, and Jews alike. She was respected across religious lines in a city that was otherwise tearing itself apart. One student wrote that she explained philosophy with such clarity that even the unlearned could follow. She was 50 years old. She had spent her entire life in the service of knowledge. But Alexandria was changing. The Roman Empire had become Christian. The old gods were being outlawed. The temples were being demolished. And the scholars who served those temples, who had preserved knowledge for 7 centuries, were now seen as enemies of the state. These were not abstract figures. They were people who woke up every morning knowing that their work might outlive them by 1,000 years. They copied scrolls by hand in rooms without windows. They argued about the shape of the earth, while empires rose and fell around them. We don't know most of their names. We know Callimachus. We know Eratosthenes. We know Hypatia. But the scribes who copied the scrolls, the translators, the cartographers, they are as lost as the works they preserved. The library was not a building, it was a community of people who believed that knowledge was worth more than gold, more than power, more than empire. And that community was about to learn the hardest lesson in history, that knowledge is fragile, and the people who protect it are fragile too. In the year 48 before Christ, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria. He was not there for the books. He was there for a war. Caesar was chasing his rival Pompey. Pompey had fled to Egypt, hoping for sanctuary from the young king Ptolemy XIII. Instead, Ptolemy's advisors assassinated Pompey. They presented his head to Caesar as a gift. Caesar was furious, not because Pompey was dead, but because a foreign king had decided the fate of a Roman consul. Caesar sided with Cleopatra, Ptolemy's sister, and found himself besieged in Alexandria by land and sea. He was outnumbered, surrounded, cut off from reinforcements. His only escape was to destroy the Egyptian fleet docked in the harbor. Today, most people believe Julius Caesar burned the Library of Alexandria to the ground. But when historians look at the actual sources, they find a problem. Caesar wrote his own account of the Alexandrian War. He describes burning the fleet. He describes the fire spreading. He describes winning the battle. He never mentions the library, not once. And the clearest surviving ancient account that blames him for destroying the library was written 150 years later. His name was Plutarch, and he had never met Caesar. Plutarch wrote, "Caesar was forced to repel the danger by using fire, which spread from the dockyards and destroyed the great library." That is the most famous sentence about the library's destruction. It is also the clearest surviving ancient account that explicitly blames Caesar for destroying the library itself. 25 years after the fire, Strabo, a geographer who spent years in Alexandria, wrote an entire book using sources from the library. He never says it was gone. He never laments its loss. He treats it as a functioning institution. If Caesar had truly destroyed the greatest library in human history, wouldn't Strabo have mentioned it? Seneca the Younger, writing around the year 50, says 40,000 books were burned in Alexandria. But he does not blame Caesar. He doesn't say when it happened. And some scholars believe he was referring to a dockside warehouse, not the main collection in the royal quarter. 40,000 sounds enormous. But if Pliny the Elder is right, that the library held 700,000 scrolls, then 40,000 is less than 6%. Here is the contradiction that haunts this case. Plutarch says the library was destroyed. Strabo says it survived. Seneca says 40,000 books burned, but doesn't say when or by whom. Pliny says 700,000 existed. Ammianus Marcellinus, writing 400 years later, says 700,000 were lost, but he seems to be combining Plutarch's story with Pliny's number. The ancient sources contradict each other, and we have no archaeological evidence to settle the question. But the story doesn't end with Caesar. The Serapeum, the daughter library in the Temple of Serapis, burned in 181 CE. It burned again in 217 CE. It was rebuilt both times. In 273 CE, the Roman Emperor Aurelian recaptured Alexandria from rebels and destroyed the palace district, which likely included whatever remained of the original Moussan library. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius issued a decree: all pagan temples must be demolished. The Patriarch of Alexandria, a man named Theophilus, led a Christian mob to the Serapeum. They destroyed the cult statue of Serapis. They tore down the temple. They built a church on the ruins. Contemporary witnesses described the devastation. One wrote that the temple was destroyed to its foundations. 24 years later, in 415 CE, Hypatia, the philosopher, the mathematician, the symbol of Alexandria's intellectual tradition, was dragged from her chariot by a Christian mob. They stripped her. They cut her with shards of pottery. They burned her remains. She was not the library, but she represented what the library's tradition had built, and her murder marked the end of an era. Here is what we know for certain. The Library of Alexandria existed. It was enormous. It was famous across the ancient world, and at some point between 48 BCE and 642 CE, it ceased to exist. Everything else is interpretation. We do not know where the library stood. Archaeologists have identified a possible site at Com el Dika, but it is partially underwater, buried beneath modern Alexandria, and has yielded no definitive library structures. The Serapeum has been partially excavated, but no one has found a room that can be definitively identified as the daughter library. Everything about the library's end is up for debate. We have Caesar's fire, multiple subsequent conflicts, the Christian purge of the Serapeum, and the symbolic murder of Hypatia. Each event chipped away at the greatest archive of the ancient world. Even the alleged Muslim conquest burning is now largely seen as a later invention. The scrolls that existed, no copies survived. Every scroll in the library was papyrus. Papyrus survives in dry climates. Alexandria is humid. The scrolls that weren't burned rotted. The ones that were copied onto parchment in other cities, Constantinople, Rome, Baghdad, are the only reason anything survived at all. But we don't know what was never copied. The Pinakes, the library catalogue, is itself lost. We know it existed because other ancient writers mention it. But the actual list, the 120 scrolls describing what the library held, burned with everything else, which means we cannot even say for certain what was lost. We know some of what vanished. The complete works of Sappho, only fragments survive. The lost books of Livy's History of Rome. The majority of Greek tragedies, only 33 of perhaps 300 survive. Medical texts that might have advanced medicine by centuries. But the full list, the Pinakes would have told us, and the Pinakes is gone. Popular history says the library's destruction set civilization back 1,000 years. That is not accurate. Many works survived because they were copied in other cities. The Byzantine Empire preserved Greek texts. The Islamic Golden Age translated and expanded on them. Medieval monasteries copied what they could. But the works that were unique to Alexandria, the ones that existed nowhere else, those are the true losses. And we don't know how many there were. And then there is the myth. In the 13th century, 600 years after the Arab conquest, a writer named Ibn al-Kifti claimed that Caliph Omar ordered the library's books burned as fuel for Alexandria's bathhouses. He said it took 6 months to burn them all. It is the most dramatic version of the story. It is also a 13th century invention with no basis in 7th century sources. Edward Gibbon, the great historian of Rome's decline, challenged this story in the 18th century. He pointed out that no contemporary source from the 7th century mentions any library destruction. Modern scholars agree. The Muslim burning is a 13th century invention, a story that emerged centuries after the events it claims to describe, with no surviving evidence from the time it supposedly happened. So who is responsible? Caesar set a fire that may have damaged it. Aurelian destroyed the palace district. Theophilus destroyed the Serapeum. Centuries of Roman neglect starved it of funding. But the honest answer, the answer that makes this a true mystery, is that we don't know. Theory 1. The slow death. The modern scholarly consensus is that the library did not die in one fire. it declined over centuries. Caesar's fire in 48 BCE damaged it, perhaps severely, but Strabo's use of it 25 years later suggests survival. The Serapeum burned and was rebuilt twice. Roman emperors after Aurelian showed no interest in funding it. By the time Theophilus destroyed the Serapeum in 391 CE, the collection may have already been severely diminished. As historian Roy MacLeod writes, the library rather slowly demised due to neglect. Credibility high. The problem with this theory is that it lacks a clear villain. People want someone to blame. A single act of destruction is emotionally satisfying. A 700-year decline caused by budget cuts and political indifference is not. But history is rarely satisfying. Theory 2. Caesar's catastrophe. Plutarch is explicit. The fire spread from the dockyards and destroyed the great library. Seneca says 40,000 books burned, possibly referring to dockside warehouse stock. The harbour fire is historically documented. The dockside warehouses, where seized books may have been stored, were in the fire's path. It is entirely possible that Caesar's fire destroyed a significant portion of the collection, perhaps the majority. Credibility medium. Theory 3. The Christian Purge. In 391 CE, Theodosius made paganism illegal. Theophilus destroyed the Serapeum. Contemporary witnesses describe extensive devastation. The daughter library was in that temple. If any significant collection remained, it likely perished then. But there is a complication. Rufinus, a contemporary eyewitness to the 391 CE destruction, describes the temple being torn down. He makes no mention of books. Hypatia's murder in 415 CE didn't destroy books, but it destroyed the community that preserved them. Credibility medium-high. Theory 4. The Muslim myth debunked. The 13th century story of Caliph Omar burning the library has been thoroughly challenged. No 7th century source mentions it. It contradicts the well-documented intellectual tolerance of early Islamic civilization. Modern scholars confirm it is 13th century invention with no basis in contemporary evidence. Credibility debunked. Summary: slow death, neglect plus gradual decline. High credibility: Caesar's catastrophe, 48 BCE fire. Medium credibility: Christian purge, 391 CE plus 415 CE. Medium-high credibility: Muslim myth, 642 CE. Debunked. The truth likely combines the first three. Caesar damaged it. Neglect weakened it. Christianity destroyed what remained. But we will never know the exact sequence, because the people who could have told us were too busy trying to survive. We know the names of some who died with the library's tradition. Hypatia, 50 years old, dragged through the streets of a city she had served her entire life, killed for being intelligent in a world that had stopped valuing intelligence. We don't know the names of the scribes, the translators, the cartographers. Their work did outlive them, just not in the way they hoped. Perhaps the most unsettling fact isn't that the Library of Alexandria burned. It's that after 2,000 years, 700 years of existence, and 4 major suspects, we still cannot say with certainty what was lost, or who we should blame, or whether the knowledge that died with it would have changed everything we think we know about our own history. The library's real legacy is a warning. Today, we believe digital storage has solved the problem of lost knowledge. But digital files decay. Formats become obsolete. Servers fail. The ancients thought copying scrolls was enough. We think cloud storage is enough. Both assumptions may be wrong. So I want to hear from you. Which theory do you believe? The slow death of neglect? Caesar's fire? The Christian purge? Or something else entirely? Drop your theory below. The best one, the one that changes how I think about this case, gets featured in next week's community post. If this story unsettled you, subscribe. Vanished Threads digs into the mysteries that history tried to bury. and the stories that refuse to stay buried. Some stories stay buried. We dig anyway.